podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm Helen O'Grady, a master executive coach and coach supervisor, and your host for this in-depth series on coaching supervision. Each episode delves into a distinctive aspect of supervision with leading practitioners and thought leaders in the field, uncovering the nuanced ways supervision enhances coaching practice, supports well-being and drives professional growth. Whether you're a seasoned supervisor, a coach curious about supervision, or simply interested in the dynamics of reflective practice, this series offers illuminating conversations that will transform how you think about coaching excellence. So lovely to welcome you to the Coaching Supervision podcast. So my guest today is Neel Arya. Thank you so much for joining me, Neel. You're a coach and a coach supervisor, and really looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise, Helen. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. I know you are really interested in developmental artistry, as you call it, and I guess that was a new notion for me. Do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about what that means for people who may not have come across the term?
Yeah, thank you. Developmental artistry is something that's been a long time brewing for me, a lifetime brewing. And in discussions with a collaborator of mine, Carissa Bub, a fellow coach and supervisor, we landed on this notion that somehow is really speaking to us in terms of our practice. And the idea behind developmental artistry is to really unshackle ourselves of a lot of the constraints, the models, the ways of thinking that we might be holding on to in some ways as professional supervisors and coaches. And so what we're trying to do with development artistry is to say, well, actually, how might we go about the art of development by really focusing in on the embodied, the experiential, the emergent, things which are entangled. And so within that is the idea of just letting go, letting things take their form, take their shape, and to move out of our heads into a deeper, more natural felt sense, felt and embodied intelligence, and to learn and to develop through experience. And so this is something that's now underpinning my practice. And in a way, it doesn't really matter if it's supervising people or coaching. It's really about just allowing that to flow through as a philosophy, an intention of really creating different ways of knowing and understanding.
And so embodied stuff, I guess people might not quite understand. You're talking about it in terms of what's happening in our body and tuning into that as opposed to our natural cognition and thinking. Have I got that right?
Absolutely spot on. So it's really about letting go of the need to process, to make sense, to be conscious, and to allow our connection to material, our understanding of material to emerge from our body. So it could be just sensations in our body, it could be the feelings within our body, but it's really allowing our thinking, because it still leads to thoughts, but to come from a different space.
So it's like the knowledge starts somewhere else and then comes up to our head. That's rather right. Than our head starting the process.
That's right. And perhaps trying to tap into something that perhaps is more raw, less refined, less accommodating, perhaps, to what we already know. And therein lies the beauty of this developmentally in terms of our capacity to reflect and to become aware, is that actually perhaps there's new data, new information. And this information is coming from an experience as well. So a processing that is happening, and we'll come on to some examples, I'm sure, in this conversation, but a processing that's happening in response to being put into a specific context.
So in terms of letting go and tuning into that, how do you support coaches? How did you do it for yourself to learn to do it? Because for a lot of us, we might need to either unlearn something or learn a new way of being and processing.
Yeah, well, I think that applies to me too. And just, cards on the table. I originally studied economics. I'm a qualified accountant. So it's been quite a long journey getting here. But I've held different roles in business. I've worked as a photographer. And somehow all of this coalesces and comes together in this practice. And I think for me, at the heart of this is being playful, It's being playful. It's really holding a spirit of love and care. And really core to this philosophy and central to all the work I'm doing is that actually it's all about experimentation. Everything is an experiment, which means in a way, letting go of what you know and stepping into the unknown in terms of how you work and how you support others. When I look at my transition, that means a lot of letting go. It means a lot of courage, a need to overcome fear, because in a way it's counter to how I've been educated in all the various forms of education I've experienced, from, original family environment through to kind of institutional education and in a career. But I'm drawn to the idea that here we are in 2025 and there's so much we don't know.
Yes.
And there is so much that is changing around us. And it's wonderful that we have different models and frameworks that we can use as coaches and coach supervisors. And it's wonderful that we have accrediting bodies that seek to bring rigor to our professions. And yet, that's not enough.
Yeah.
And so this desire for developmental artistry is really to embrace play. It's to embrace not knowing. It's to embrace experimentation and almost to say, here we are, and we're learning, and we still don't know. And so let's embrace that and come with this almost like a beginner's mind to our developmental interactions.
And I wonder actually whether, in some ways, my experience as a beginner, that's where I really wanted certainty. And when I work with coaches, often in the beginning of their journey, they struggle to sit with that uncertainty. And my own journey towards, and it's not there, but developing my own mastery has been about being comfortable with uncertainty. And you're naming it that the world is uncertain. And actually, as coaches and supervisors, if we can be experimental and not know, great stuff happens.
Yeah. And I think we have a great responsibility to the world. Almost it works from the supervisor to the coach, working back into the systems that our work impacts. And if we can develop this capacity to be freer, to be more with what is going to come, then might that ripple back and might that build capacity to help us respond to the now? I mean, it's March 2025, and I'm struck by the number of times I'm hearing how the world's really changed.
Yeah.
And of course, it has in a very obvious, explicit, gross way. But the more nuanced aspects of that have been in play for a long time. And there are a number of things that we also see going on under the surface that are no doubt going to exacerbate that change. When we think about technology, be it through artificial intelligence, be it through biology, and the advances that are being made, all of that ground is shifting. And we know these things have societal ramifications. And it's just too cliche to say, right? Change is the new normal. Never felt it's been as fast as today, blah, blah, blah. We all know these cliches. But actually, if we think about our profession and we think about our desire to model and frame things and map things, I wonder if there's a more fluid, more organic way for us to show up in the work that we do.
So how does it show up for you as a coach and as a supervisor? How do you work with this and support others to work with developmental artistry?
It's a continuing and ongoing journey. One of the things that continues to strike me is, as you work with coaches and supervisors, is that actually we really, really crave some element of structure. So for me, one of the great opportunities we have is to experiment with our supervisees and coaches around letting go of that structure. So allowing for more emergence. And that, in really simple terms, can mean that you can have emergent supervision conversations. You can have emergent coaching conversations. There's obviously a contracting element that's important there. And this comes down to our philosophies. But how do we open up to that? And so it's not uncommon for me to say, if I'm coaching, say, well, actually, is there something specific you want to work on today? Would you like to have an emergent conversation? And what I find is the more that the individuals I'm working with are dealing with complexity, the more they want to have emergent conversations. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's just see where it goes.
I guess my brain has gone to, with those emergent conversations, as you say, the contracting is part of it, but how do you know, or how between you do you work out when the work is done or when the conversation is over, I guess?
Yeah, in really, really simple terms, I think I'm checking in.
Yeah.
How is this going? What else do you feel like you need to say or you want to bring into the conversation? But I think it's, if we take that step back and let go, then there's a sort of watching that we do. If you like, we're on the dance floor or we're on the balcony at the same time. And so it is through this art of dialogue and just checking in with your dance partner. Where are we? Where do we need to go? It is interesting to me. So even very experienced supervisors and coaches have a desire for structure. We've spoken about this briefly before, but been recently in discussions where it's felt to more experienced professionals in our industry that actually without structure, you have chaos. And I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah. I think there's something about, for me, that chaos is avoided if we trust ourselves and trust our clients. As you say, for it to emerge together and to be on the dance floor or get above the dance floor and say, okay, where are we going?
Yeah.
And it might feel like chaos in the moment when we're spinning around the dance floor, but actually there's a pattern or there's something emerging from it that we can trust our clients to make sense of.
Yeah, absolutely. That then just leads into sort of being with confusion, being with messiness.
Yes.
And of course, great supervisory topic. How are we in the mess? What does that trigger in us?
I think the mess is where the work is, isn't it? I often describe supervision and I say I like supervising in that messy grey space.
Yes.
Because our brains, a bit like you were saying, the same as the certainty, I think, go to black and white, right and wrong, the extremes.
Yes.
And actually stuff is in that messy middle bit.
Absolutely. And perhaps we'll talk about this later on when we get into some of the workshops I've been running, but we're really focusing on that messy middle and what does it look like and feel like to be in that messy middle.
Let's talk about that now, because I know you've got some different language that you use around that. So How do you conceptualize it?
I found myself very fascinated with the idea of liminal space.
And you're going to have to define that for those of us whose cognition isn't quite there.
Yeah, it's funny. It's ironic. This chap is here. He's talking all about being embodied and experiential, and yet it might feel incredibly cognitive as a conversation. And I think that's the sort of beauty of applying developmental artistry, is it does take it out of this somewhat perhaps philosophical narrative that we're exploring. But yes, so liminality being the idea that we're between states.
Right. So different from transition or the same as transition?
I would hold that liminality is more universal.
Right.
So when we're in transition, and if you were going to work with the bridges idea there, then, in that neutral zone, you might say, actually, that's a liminal space. A liminal space might be walking through the hall in your home. You're in between. Now, the map may be less messy as an example, but then we have all of these different liminal spaces that we inhabit as we grow older, being a teenager, finding our way into adulthood, stage of life I'm at, being middle-aged, right?
Menopausal woman, I'll own that.
There you go. And just recognizing that. Who am I now? How am I showing up physiologically? What's happening with my memory? And I don't claim to be able to understand, but being of a certain age, come into contact with this. And so this question, there's almost this loss of identity, this loss of who am I? Where's it gone? And we know that can be incredibly disorienting. So really interested in liminality. I went on a Vipassana meditation retreat.
Which again, I don't know very much about. That's a type of yoga or?
It's a silent meditation.
Oh, wow.
Retreat. So it's a group that runs these practices, and you start by going off 10 days in silence. Wow. You check your phone and all writing implements into a locker. And you have an interesting 10 days with yourself, surrounded by others. And in this particular instance, I'd come back from a shorter one and attended a workshop by another supervisor, colleague Leila Rezagui, from the Middle East, who was working on the idea of supervision and the relationship to being in the dark. And it triggered a thought for me. It was like, actually, what would it be like to really be in the dark? And how could the dark be used as a metaphor and as an experience for being in liminal space? coming back to all the changes in the world at all the various different levels that we've discussed, right? Be it menopause, be it AI, be it changing geopolitical situations, et cetera, et cetera. And so the idea there was to educate us as coaches on what it's like for us to be in liminality. And as we said already, it's that messy middle. So the point there was to really make it experiential, like back to developmental artistry. It's experiential, it's embodied, it's emergent. We don't know what's going to happen. And I always go back to my coach training was with the Coaching Supervision Academy. And Edna Murdoch, who's one of the leaders of that program, often talks about who you are is how you supervise. And so who are we in the dark, in the messy middle between these thresholds? How do we respond to that? What shows up? What is our capacity for holding that ourselves? Because that capacity is then going to have those knock-on implications back through the system, as we already discussed. So for me, it was about creating that type of experience.
And so you deliberately create that now for your clients, or you help other coaches and coach supervisors? Like, what's the application that you're using for?
One of the applications is designing a workshop to experience this. I run that for coach supervisors specifically. And what that means is being in the dark for a period of time in a structured space. There are certain rules and parameters for being in that darkness. One of them is that you literally have to blindfold yourself. And then, without giving too much away, there are certain exercises that we go through in that space.
So to really push people into the not knowing, the uncertainty.
Right.
That gap. And as you say, not intellectualize it, just put yourself in that discomfort and trust whatever comes up.
Yeah, or notice how untrusting you are. Because once you're in that space, you are going to respond.
Yeah.
And then it's about the noticing, right? So this is where we're in our body, we're in our thoughts, we're noticing what's happening for us. So in a way, it feels like a funny metaphor, but it's like holding up a mirror.
Yes.
But where the mirror is absent, there's no light, right? It's an absence of light.
Yeah.
And so what becomes really interesting is that most of the time in this workshop, you're in a space that you're familiar with. Like we're in familiar spaces when we coach or we supervise. And so as Winfred Bion that talked about the role of memory, desire and understanding and seeking to be free of that, perhaps in our interactions. And yet when we're in a space that we know, but we're experiencing in a new way, what do we hold on to, right? Coming back to your point around and learning, what are we clinging on to? How do we notice we're clinging on to it? How do we allow ourselves to let go? What might we discover? And the thing that's really beautiful about working in a space is that the space will have its own boundaries.
Say a bit more about what you mean by the boundaries, Neel.
Being in a physical space, there will be physical objects around us.
So the walls of this room, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could see your plant and your lovely, bright, comfy armchair there. And what does that contact look like? How does that impact you? What is a solid boundary? What is a hard boundary condition? What is something that can be navigated or be changed or be interacted with in a different way? It's very meta, right? But because you're experiencing it, my view would be that then that helps us as supervisors to develop that capacity to then bring that into our discussions. Where are the limits to our thinking? Where are the limits to our being? And back to who we are is how we supervise, or who we are is how we coach. Therefore, who are you being in your practice?
And I think that notion of what are we holding on to without even realizing that we're holding on to them.
Yeah.
When you were talking, it was making me think about, probably like you, most of my work is now online. And I'm really used to paying attention to what people are doing through the camera. And occasionally, if the camera's not working or some other forms where I'm back to phone coaching, which I used to do a long time ago, suddenly I'm having to use different parts of my brain and pay attention to different things that I maybe don't pay attention to.
And that's it. And that's where us as supervisors, as sensors, becomes so important. And again, back into the body and our intuition and our connection to the field and what's between us becomes so important. And again, in the darkness, do you feel the plant? Do you feel the armchair even before you come into contact with it? So the relational presence.
Almost that heightened awareness, creating an experiential place to increase our awareness of everything.
Yeah.
I'm imagining then allows us to bring that heightened awareness back to our supervision or our coaching.
This is it. So we're working on ourselves as the instrument. We're working on ourselves as the sensor. And it's embodied, and it's about trusting that if we do that work, it's going to be in service of our clients and the wider system around us.
It's making me think you used the word earlier about courage. Actually takes quite a lot of courage, particularly, I think, well, I'll speak for myself as I've got more experience, sometimes putting yourself back in that place of conscious incompetence or the removing those boundaries and that stuff that I hold on to actually takes more courage than maybe when I was a learner.
Yeah. It's terrifying, isn't it? I feel terrified just hearing you say that. And I can't remember who said it, but it's that idea that in supervision, we should both be supervisee and supervisor, in terror almost at what we're about to contemplate. Because if we're truly letting go of what we know,
it's scary.
Then it's scary.
It should be scary.
It should be scary. And I think I wrestle with this every day. And I love the quote by Kurt Vonnegut, the author, who said, we need to get better at jumping off cliffs and growing wings on the way down.
Oh, I like that quote. I've not heard that. And trusting that if we do jump off the cliff, the wings are there when we need them.
The wings are there and the air is there. And
I've got red kites, right? The thermals up here. We're just going on the wind. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So it is that act of courage, right? Overcoming the terror, the fear. But I think that's why actually holding this idea and the notion that the work we do is experimental is really important, because there will be learning.
And again, earlier you talked about experimental being playful, but embodied by love. And I was really drawn to that, particularly as you say, with where we are in the world. It feels like we need more love in the world.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was doing a group supervision session earlier using this approach, another form of developmental artistry that I'm calling HUART. HUART actually is spelled H+ART.
Okay.
And for me, that embodies this idea that we bring the playfulness, the creativity, the emergence, but with love, with deep love. And in this space, those qualities, I think, bring you deeply into connection with yourself, whether it's your core self, whether it's your soul, whether it's another label that you want to apply. But again, just using creative techniques to access that, I think just creates a different layer and level of engagement. And to be clear, because you're probably going to ask me, what creative techniques? And really, there's no limitation to that. So when I work in that space, I might prescribe certain tools, certain techniques. So that could mean drawing. That could mean photographing. That could mean capturing a dance or an object. I've been experimenting recently with poetry based on inputs drawn from the seven-eyed model of supervision.
That's Hawkins, isn't it? Just for people.
Shohei and Hawkins, yeah, absolutely. And if you bring in the content, and obviously privacy is important, right? So there's various technical things we can do, as well as being thoughtful about the content that we put into a large language model. But it can be an incredible creative partner, right? When you think about how would you describe that person, or who do they remind you of, or what is a context, and you get that to pull it all together, and then you're given an artifact. And with all of these different creative techniques and tools, be it imagery, be it AI generated poetry, whatever it may be, the richness in group supervision is certainly the discussion that you have around those artifacts. What is it the group is able to access, give voice to, and raise awareness around?
And that's the power, I think, isn't it, of good group supervision, that everybody takes something different, but the collective build and the noticing and the awareness that you get from listening to others and collectively doing stuff is very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so did these techniques, really getting into that developmental artistry and exploring that in particular, is it mostly suited to group work, do you think, Neel, or does it work for individual supervision as well?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's definitely a power of doing with groups, as you rightly point out. But I think in the individual arena, yeah, absolutely, we can bring that philosophy to bear. And for me, one of the ways that shows up in individual work is the use of great works of art.
Oh, okay.
So we talked about bridges, we talked about transition, we talked about being in liminal space. And one of the things that I've done is I've curated great works of art that somehow embody liminality. And it continues, very technical term here, continues to blow my mind.
It's a great technical term. I like it.
Blows my mind what can happen in one-to-one work where you bring one of these works of art. My particular favorites are from the likes of Edward Hopper and Dorothea Tanning, a surrealist painter. But you bring these works of art and they really speak to navigating liminal space. They really speak to developmental stages. They really speak to being in that messy middle. And typically when I work with that type of art, and obviously it's great art and it's rich. And of course, one of the core things about developmental artistry is the fact that it's about creating the experiences that I spoke about earlier, right? With the embodied and with the experiential and immersion, but it's layered. So I'm really inspired by being in an art gallery and getting lost in a work of art, right? Who I am is how I supervise. So there's something there that's really important, is actually that as you peel back the layers of meaning, there's more and more that comes apparent. And so working with these great artists' output, it just never ceases to amaze me how it just creates wonder, it creates attachment. Clients want the artwork afterwards because they develop such a deep connection with it.
And by connection, I'm hearing meaning and meaning to their work. So they want that visual reminder of the connections they've made within the conversation.
Absolutely. Somehow that becomes incredibly instructive about understanding their practice or understanding their work or their life or who they are and who they're becoming. And again, that's embodied, isn't it, at that stage?
Yeah, truly embodied. I'm noticing, again, the developmental stuff, and I'm wondering whether working in this type of way, what your view is, whether it is across the development, both of coaches and coach supervisors. As in, do you think it's more suited to more experienced coaches and more experienced coach supervision? Or is it something that people are comfortable with? Or is that my, I guess, limiting belief that newer coaches might find this hard?
It's a really great question. On one level, it feels appropriate to say, yes, if you're a mature, experienced supervisor or a really experienced coach, then this should be more accessible to you. I don't know that I believe that.
No.
Again, who you are is how you supervise and how you coach. So there are occasional kind of foundations that I don't let go of. I think it's really about our curiosity. It's our willingness to be with the unknown. It's being with our willingness to question. I recently saw a post on social media. Someone was referring to a certain accrediting body. They referred to as the police.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there's a tension there.
Yes.
There is a real tension there, because here I am saying, I really fundamentally believe in developmental artistry. I believe in the experimentation. I believe in the capacity of people to connect to this material, to develop from this material. And I believe that fundamentally because I think it's a part of us. But it comes down to how we see the world. And I'm going to introduce a term and you're going to ask me to define it. But our vertical development, right?
Yeah.
Our capacity, the container that we hold in order to perceive the world, I imagine is very different across coaches and can perhaps be less mature or more mature regardless of your capacity as a practitioner, right? Your level of experience. Yeah, absolutely. And so if we're also trying, and I think this is really important to me, if we're trying to be relevant to the age we live in as a profession, then I think I would want to be open to sharing these techniques more broadly, because I'm conscious that our profession officially was born in the 70s and kind of codified in the 1990s. And so where are we now? And I guess my hope through these experiments is that we're somehow finding some aspects that are universal. And absolutely, I would just want to be really clear. like a good artist, I steal with passion. Right?
Yes.
So it's not like these elements have never existed, but as always, it's about the recombination and the reforming. So absolutely stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And yet we continue to invent to make things relevant for the here and now. And so my invitation would be to your listeners is, if this is interesting for you, we're going to be running more workshops heading into the autumn, right? HUT is available. If those are interested in group supervision, these are available.
We'll be putting I'll get you to give specifics towards the end, but also we'll have the links in the podcast notes for people to contact you. But sorry, Neel, keep going. Your invitation.
There's that invitation, and I don't want to have an answer in some ways, Helen, but just to be curious and open, that I really believe in this day and age, what we're seeing, and I think I'm not going to be political here, but if we look at politics and we look at the media around politics in the West, what we see is a real fragmentation of media. And the point being that actually in politics, you can find your tribes, and maybe getting elected in a democratic environment is concocting a narrative that links enough of those tribes together. And so here we are in supervision and coaching in a field where there are somewhat different tribes. Right. And maybe those tribes link to accrediting bodies, I don't know. But I think even outside of those, there are other tribes, right? I was joking with someone about woo-ness yesterday, and they said, well, I think you're woo adjacent.
Oh.
And I was like, I was kind of comfortable being woo adjacent. I don't know that I go all the full woo, but, your listeners might disagree. But we definitely have continuums, right, within our profession that are not codified.
No.
But they're very much here in the culture of supervision and coaching.
I'm really drawn to it. I guess I have a wish and sometimes feel like we are, when we teach coaching and the coaching schools, they put, as you say, that rigidness in there, and then actually we have to unlearn it. I'm curious, I wonder about how fabulous it would be actually if we start working from that place of uncertainty and pushing people to be comfortable with it from day one, rather than many of us going, okay, I've kind of got sucked into certainty and I now have to work quite hard to let that go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love it if in some way us having this conversation leads to people getting in touch and saying, well, that sounds really interesting. And of course, it's about finding your own voice.
Absolutely. The continuum, isn't it? That it isn't a unified voice, and we don't want a unified voice, whether we're coaches or coach supervisors, that we own and be comfortable with our voice.
Yes, to bring our magic and hopefully create these ripples, right? So what could a movement look like where we're opening up to this reimagining? And that's why I keep coming back to experimentation, because I think it's through experimentation where we say, do you know what? We're just trying something. And it's the scaling is less important.
Yeah. Final question. We could keep talking. I could talk all afternoon, Neel. But what we haven't touched on is if you've noticed or aware of cultural differences around this space and the art.
So your question is, how does developmental artistry land differently depending on the cultures that you're working with?
Yes, and liminal space and darkness and any of these concepts you've talked about.
I think depending on the audience, I might not be so explicit about naming those things.
Because
I trust in the process of people experiencing, and trust that as they make sense or they draw their insights from, say, working with the wonderful artworks of Hopper and Tanning, that something is going to land for them. Within a coaching supervision space, I'm wholeheartedly more explicit, but that explicitness might be more after the fact.
Okay.
After the experiencing. So in my experience so far, I'm mainly working probably from North America through to, I would say, the Middle East. And I have found that it's actually more dependent on the personality, right, rather than the original culture, how open people are to that. But I want to be clear, it doesn't feel like it's for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And I think that's, for me, a characteristic of this time, which is that in my work, I don't want to be mass. I don't want to appeal to everyone. I want to appeal to those that have curiosity in this space. So I think in a way, It's about finding the subculture and who wants to be part of that subculture.
And I think it's always, I talk about this coaching, it's right time, right place. Sometimes coaching isn't right for people at this moment in time. That doesn't mean to say it's never going to be right for them. It's just not the fit at the moment. And that sounds a little bit the same, but it's like we've got to be drawn to what interests us and what we're curious about at this moment in time. And that's changeable, or for most of us, that's changeable.
Couldn't have put it better. And it's being and dancing with that fluidity.
Great.
And recognizing it's there.
What a joy. To summarise it, this is going to put you on the spot, but what do you think are the main things that are helpful for people to take away?
I think it's a starting point. Let's remember that who we are is fundamental to the work that we do. And our understanding of who we are is fundamental. And as we come into contact with that and really own that, which is an act of courage in itself, then that opens up space to find our own voice. And in my case, it's that voice of developmental artistry. And it's really trusting in the unshackling of the models, of the frames, of the mechanistic, and being with the embodied and the experiential and the emergent, seeking to understand, unlearning, learning in new, fresh and different ways, and just to do it in a way that's fun, that's playful and that's fun and that's creative. And really, really importantly, is full of love. And we know, you and I both know, that if you can imbue a space with love, the capacity for generative thinking, for generative behaviors, for shifts, for transformation is vastly increased.
Thank you so much, Neel. I think there's so much in there. How can people get in touch with you and know more? You talked about some workshops and ways for people to connect with you. Absolutely.
So, and we'll type this out and put it in the notes, but my website is metal-consulting.com. So
Metal,
METTLE. And if you want to email me, you can email me at supervision@metal-consulting.com. In the autumn 2025, I'm pleased to be running again the latest iteration of the Dark Workshop. I'll be doing that on the 19th of September. I'll put a link in the notes as well. And also I'll be launching the sequel to the Dark, which is called Dancing in the Dark. So the Dark will be run on Friday 19th of September, Dancing in the Dark Friday 14th of November. There'll be 2 sessions to catch a global audience. And I'm pleased to say that we also have a discount code for listeners to this podcast, Amazing. Which is very simply in capitals AC Neel, which is ACNEEL.
Lovely.
And if you pop that in when you book, then the price will be reduced to $0.
Oh, amazing. Gosh, that's very generous, Neel. Thank you so much. And it sounds fascinating and I've really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you.
Me too. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Helen.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.